Night falls over São Paulo like a heavy curtain, swallowing the city's noise as the lights of Tatuape flicker in the distance. On the outskirts of the neighborhood lies a stretch of land that once promised peace. Parque do Estado, one of the largest green areas in the region, a place families used to visit, where couples would walk under the dense canopy, and where the sound of leaves rustling in the wind mixed with the distant echoes of traffic. But in the late 1990s, this serene landscape began to transform into something else entirely. Something darker, something that would linger in the collective memory of Brazil for decades. This is where the story of the Maniac do Parque begins. And it begins not with a monstrous figure stepping out of the shadows, but with a series of disappearances so subtle, so dismissed in their early days, that no one could have foreseen the storm that was coming. Women vanished, young, hopeful, searching for modeling opportunities. Women who trusted the wrong stranger. Women who walked into the trees and never walked back out. The kind of disappearances that often slip through the cracks of a city used to chaos, but soon became threads that would weave one of Brazil's most haunting real crimes. To understand the impact of what happened, one must understand the time and place. São Paulo in the late 90s was a city of contradictions. Booming economically, expanding culturally, yet still plagued by inequality, crime, and a constant tension simmering beneath day-to-day life. The idea of a serial killer stalking parks and targeting women sounded like something out of a foreign crime documentary, not something from the heart of Brazil's largest metropolis. But reality would prove far more disturbing than fiction. At the center of this narrative is Francisco de Assis Pereira, a man whose outward appearance did not match the darkness hiding behind it. A man who worked as a motorcycle courier, lived an unremarkable life on the surface, and yet carried an ability that made him especially dangerous. He could blend in. He was charismatic enough to spark trust, convincing enough to weave stories that disarmed his victims, and ordinary enough to pass as just another face in the crowd. There was no obvious menace in his gestures, nothing that would warn a passerby to run. Before the country learned his name, all that existed were fragments. Stories whispered by families, police reports that seemed routine at first glance, missing persons notes taped to walls and bus stops. Many of the victims shared something in common: dreams. Dreams of becoming models. Dreams of a career, of a chance, of a future. It was this vulnerability, this desire for opportunity, that the predator exploited. He posed as a talent scout, a photography assistant, someone who promised entry into the glamorous world of fashion. He offered hope disguised as professionalism. And in a society fascinated with beauty standards and upward mobility, his bait was tragically effective. Victims believed him. Families believed him. Even acquaintances who crossed paths with him would later recall his demeanor as calm, almost gentle. Nothing about him suggested the kind of cruelty that would later surface in the investigation. But shadows don't announce themselves. They stretch slowly, quietly, until they swallow everything around them. The first signs that something terrible was unfolding didn't come from the jungle of the park, but from a growing sense of unease spreading among the families of the missing. Mothers who waited for phone calls that never came. Siblings who sensed that something was wrong long before authorities did. And among these voices was the rising fear that their daughters hadn't simply walked away from their lives. They had been lured. The park soon became a character in this story, as ominous and silent as the crimes committed within it. Its forested trails created a labyrinth of isolation, where noise died quickly and visibility was limited. To most visitors, the park was still a public space, open, accessible, familiar. But beneath its beauty lay countless hiding places, vast stretches of land where someone could vanish without leaving a trace. And as reports multiplied, detectives began to suspect that the green expanse was not just a backdrop. It was part of the crime itself, perfect hunting ground. The investigations were slow at first, tangled in bureaucracy and hindered by the challenges of connecting cases without clear evidence. But the reality became undeniable when a pattern emerged. Young women between 16 and 30 years old, last seen with a man resembling the same description. Dark hair, average build, confident speech, and an insistence that he had contacts in the modeling industry. As pressure mounted, the ambience around Parque do Estado changed. Locals began avoiding certain trails. Rumors spread of strange footsteps at night, of motorcycles spotted near secluded entrances, of voices heard in the distance where no one should have been. Fear seeped into daily life. The idea that a predator might be hiding in the city's backyard became no longer far-fetched, but almost certain. But it wasn't fear that finally shifted the case. It was a survivor. One woman, whose identity would become crucial to the unraveling of the truth, escaped after sensing that something was terribly wrong during her encounter with the supposed talent scout. She noticed inconsistencies in his story. She noticed the shift in his tone once they approached the more isolated areas of the park. And above all, she trusted her instinct, the instinct that told her to run. Her testimony provided not just clues, but a profile, a direction, a warning. Her escape forced the police to confront what many feared to admit. The disappearances were connected. From that moment on, the manhunt began. Detectives reconstructed movements. Witnesses came forward. Missing persons cases were reviewed. And little by little, the mosaic of events began forming a very clear and horrifying image. The motorcycle courier with a charming pitch was no longer anonymous. He now had a face, a file, and a record of disturbing behavior in his past. A past that had gone unnoticed long enough for him to continue his predatory routine. As newspapers caught wind of the investigation, the story exploded across the country. Headlines warned of a serial attacker. TV reporters stationed themselves near the park, capturing footage of the dense forest as if it were a living nightmare. Mothers begged viewers for information. Authorities increased patrols. The entire nation held its breath. But the most gripping part of this story, the psychological descent into the mind of the predator, the unraveling of the truth behind his facade, and the horrifying scope of what he had done, was still to come. For now, all Brazil knew was this. There was a killer on the loose, and he walked among millions without raising suspicion. The park that once symbolized nature and serenity had transformed into a place of dread. And the man responsible, Francisco de Assis Pereira, had no intention of stopping. This was only the beginning. The deeper investigators dug into the growing list of disappearances around Parque do Estado. The more disturbing the portrait of the suspect became. The name that kept resurfacing, quietly at first, then with increasing urgency, was Francisco de Assis Pereira. To most people who crossed his path, he was unremarkable. A motorcycle courier navigating the chaotic streets of São Paulo, a man who blended seamlessly into the urban landscape. But behind this anonymity was a life marked by contradictions, unsettling behaviors, and a psychological profile that experts would later scrutinize for years. To understand how he managed to lure so many victims, one has to understand the double life he crafted. On the surface, Francisco appeared calm, sometimes even shy. He had a certain softness in the way he spoke, an ability to make himself seem harmless, approachable. Those who worked with him described him as polite, sometimes reserved, but never alarming. He smiled easily, maintained friendly conversations, and rarely caused conflict. In crowded streets, he vanished into the sea of ordinary faces. But behind this mask lived someone entirely different, someone capable of manipulation with precision. He understood vulnerability, he understood desire, and he understood one of the most powerful forces that could influence young lives in São Paulo during the 1990s. The dream of fame. The modeling industry was booming in Brazil at the time. Agencies searched for new faces constantly, and advertisements promising glamour and opportunity were everywhere. Francisco knew this. He observed it, and he weaponized it. His approach was always calculated. He targeted young women with outward confidence but inner uncertainty. Women who looked like they carried ambitions, hopes, maybe insecurities he could exploit. Women who wanted something more. He would approach them with a rehearsed line about being connected to photographers or modeling scouts. He spoke with enough confidence to sound convincing, but softened his tone just enough to appear trustworthy. This balance was crucial. Too aggressive, and he'd raise suspicion. Too timid, and he'd lose his grip on the fragile illusion he needed to sustain. Investigators later pieced together testimonies from acquaintances, former colleagues, and even past partners, revealing subtle cracks in his calm facade. Some mention moments where he seemed disturbed, displaying sudden mood shifts. Others recalled unusual comments about women or beauty, delivered with an intensity that felt misplaced. But none of these moments, isolated as they were, ever appeared threatening enough for someone to take action. People overlooked them, they excused them, and those small cracks remained unnoticed until it was too late. The investigation entered a new phase when detectives obtained a photograph of him for questioning purposes. They showed the image to the survivor, the woman who had escaped him. The moment she saw it, her reaction was immediate and chillingly clear. She recognized him instantly. Her testimony became the keystone in the case, the missing link that allowed authorities to finally put a name and face to the predator haunting the city. From that point on, Francisco was no longer a shadow in the park. He was a fugitive. Police searched his known addresses, but he had already vanished. His disappearance was so swift that investigators suspected he had planned an escape route. In reality, he was moving across Sao Paulo, hiding in different neighborhoods, relying on acquaintances who had no idea of what he had done. As news of the case spread, the country became transfixed. Journalists broadcast the story day and night, alerting the public to stay vigilant. The term Maniaco do Parque began circulating, a name that would become synonymous with fear, tragedy, and one of the darkest criminal chapters in Brazil's history. But behind the media frenzy was a more complex portrait of the man the nation was hunting. Psychologists drafted preliminary profiles based on his behaviors and the methods he used to approach victims. Their analysis painted a chilling picture. A man who derived power not from violence itself, but from control. He didn't rely on strength or intimidation. His weapon was persuasion. His battlefield was trust. And his victims walked into danger willingly because he made them believe they were safe. That psychological blueprint made him particularly difficult to predict. People like him, experts said, were often skilled at mimicking empathy without feeling it, at performing social warmth without internalizing any moral responsibility. They learned to imitate normal behavior, wearing it like a costume tailored to deceive. But while experts attempted to understand his mind, detectives focused on something far more urgent: tracking his movements. The more they investigated his past, the more they uncovered troubling signs. A pattern of manipulation in previous relationships, instances where he displayed emotional instability, mentions of therapy sessions he never completed, a history of minor arrests or altercations that, in retrospect, hinted at deeper issues. None of these were enough to signal the magnitude of what he would eventually do, but they formed a trail of red flags that had gone unaddressed. The public, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious. Women avoided walking alone, especially in parks or secluded areas. Rumors of sightings spread constantly, some true, many false. Panic rippled through the city. Sao Paulo felt smaller suddenly, more suffocating, as though danger could be lurking around any corner. Authorities ramped up their efforts, deploying teams to search wooded areas, interviewing former co-workers, and following every lead. They discovered that Francisco had a habit of frequenting certain bars and motorcycle repair shops. He had acquaintances scattered across the metropolitan region, and he had a tendency to disappear for days without explanation, something that now seemed far more ominous than it did before the case broke open. During this time, journalists attempted to piece together who he really was. They interviewed neighbors who remembered him as quiet, teachers who described him as average, childhood friends who recalled moments of withdrawal or strange behavior, but nothing dramatic. If anything, the most common theme across these testimonies was confusion. No one could reconcile the Francisco they knew with the image of a serial predator dominating the headlines. This contrast, the ordinary exterior hiding extraordinary darkness, became one of the case's most frightening aspects. It suggested not only that a monster had been living among them undetected, but that this monster had mastered the art of appearing harmless. And if someone like him could blend in so easily, how many others could as well? As the manhunt intensified, police received one of the most crucial tips of the entire case. A witness reported seeing a man matching Francisco's description near a bus station on the coastal highway, heading in the direction of the shoreline. Authorities rushed to the scene, narrowing down possible hideouts. They followed the trail to Itapoa, a small coastal region on the border of São Paulo and Parana. It was a place where a fugitive could blend into the transient flow of travelers, where anonymity was easy to maintain. But even as police closed in, Francisco managed to stay one step ahead. He altered his appearance, shaved his hair, and used false identities. For weeks he remained just beyond the reach of law enforcement, navigating the cracks of society with disturbing ease. During this period, media outlets began examining his personal writings, interviews he had given in the past, and even early psychological reports. They found contradictions everywhere. He described himself as someone who feared abandonment, someone plagued by insecurities about relationships and intimacy. Yet he also portrayed a distorted sense of superiority, believing he could manipulate others at will. This duality fascinated experts. It suggested a psyche fractured in ways that were both alarming and deeply complex. The public wanted answers. They wanted to understand what drove a man to such extremes. They wanted assurance that he would be caught. But most of all, they wanted something even harder to achieve: closure. Families of the missing continued to push authorities, attending every press conference, demanding updates, clinging to the hope that justice would prevail. Their grief became part of the national conversation. Their determination became a symbol of resilience. Meanwhile, the image of Francisco, now infamous, broadcast across the country, had become the face of nightmare. People studied his photograph, memorizing his features, as if understanding his appearance could protect them. Schools warned students. Employers reminded staff to stay cautious. The city had become a network of alert eyes and tense hearts, all waiting for one critical moment: his capture. And that moment was drawing near. Investigators had managed to trace his movements through a series of sightings and surveillance footage. Each new lead brought them closer. Each misstep he made, buying food with cash, interacting with strangers, leaving subtle traces, tightened the noose. But before his arrest, before the country learned the full extent of what he had done, one more crucial chapter would unfold. A chapter that would expose not only his crimes, but also the fracture points in the society that allowed him to operate unnoticed for so long. This chapter would mark the turning point of the investigation, and it would shake Brazil like never before. By the time investigators reached the midpoint of their search, the Maniac do Parque case had become more than a manhunt. It had become a national obsession. Every news broadcast, every radio program, every newspaper headline carried some new fragment of information, some new theory, some new warning. Brazil had seen violent crimes before, but nothing with this combination of method, deception, and psychological manipulation. Nothing that suggested a predator walking unnoticed among millions. As authorities honed their pursuit, a small task force within São Paulo's police department intensified their work. They met daily in a cramped room filled with maps, photographs, red strings linking confirmed sightings to disappearances, and stacks of reports documenting interviews with families, friends, and witnesses. What they were trying to understand was not only where Francisco was, but who he was, because to catch him, they needed to anticipate him. And to anticipate him, they needed to decode him. The task force was composed of detectives, analysts, psychologists, and forensic experts. Their meetings were structured but tense. Every new lead was dissected. Every contradiction was examined. They asked the same questions repeatedly. What drives a man like this? Where does he feel safe? What kind of environment does he return to when he's under pressure? What mistakes will he make when cornered? To ground their psychological profile, the team brought in behavioral experts who specialized in criminal patterns. They reviewed the techniques he used to approach victims, the promises of modeling opportunities, the gentle tone, the ability to build trust quickly. These weren't random tactics, they were strategic. They were curated for maximum impact. And they reflected a man who understood social cues far better than most people realized. That was the chilling part. He didn't rely on force to gain access to his victims. He relied on persuasion, on charisma, on a facade meticulously crafted to hide his intentions. This made him more dangerous than any brute predator. It meant he could adapt. It meant he could deceive. And, most importantly, it meant he could evolve. Investigators believed that as the media pressure intensified, he would adjust his behavior, that he might abandon his usual methods, that he might try to slip away, reinvent himself, or even change his approach entirely. Predicting his next move became a race against time, a race where missteps could cost lives. Public fear reached unprecedented levels. Women stopped jogging alone. Modeling agencies issued warnings. Parents instructed their daughters never to speak to strangers promising any kind of opportunity. Real fear, raw and heavy, settled over Sao Paulo like a fog. As the pressure grew, police started re-interviewing witnesses from the early days of the investigation. Many of them remembered small details they hadn't mentioned before. A comment he made, something he was wearing, the sound of his voice, a particular nervous gesture. These fragments, insignificant on their own, began forming a pattern when placed together. A pattern investigators desperately needed. One witness recalled seeing him ride a motorcycle with a distinctive exhaust sound. Another mentioned that he often wore a fake necklace that looked expensive but wasn't. A former co-worker remembered his tendency to talk about travel, especially to coastal towns, as if he felt drawn to them. When detectives overlaid these details onto recent sightings, something clicked. He might be heading south toward the coast, to the region of Santa Catarina. Itapoa, a small coastal area he had visited before, once again emerged as a key location. Meanwhile, inside the task force, the psychological analysis grew increasingly elaborate. Several experts who studied his behavior described a man torn between two internal forces, one that craved connection and admiration, and another that craved control. They noted his ability to mask discomfort with charm, how he shifted his body language to mirror the people he spoke with, how he adopted a tone that made him seem vulnerable. All tactics that manipulated trust. This didn't happen by accident. According to experts, individuals like him learn these behaviors early in life. They develop a talent for reading people, not to empathize with them, but to exploit them. They understand what others want to hear, how to appear trustworthy, how to project sincerity. And they maintain this performance effortlessly, as though their personality were a set of masks they could switch between at will. This insight helped investigators refine their strategy. They realized that despite being on the run, he would still seek environments where he could blend in, where he could perform social normalcy convincingly, even if only for brief interactions. He would avoid isolation because isolation meant losing the camouflage he relied upon. With this in mind, police began conducting targeted surveillance at bus stations, coastal access points, rest stops, and low-cost lodgings. They knew he needed food. They knew he needed shelter. And they believed he would choose locations where transient populations made it easy to disappear into the crowd. As investigators dug deeper into his personal history, they uncovered more troubling indications of instability. A former girlfriend mentioned episodes of unpredictable behavior, sudden shifts from charm to cold detachment. Another acquaintance described him as someone who struggled to handle rejection, someone who expressed a deep fear of abandonment. These emotional fractures provided further context for how he manipulated victims. But even with this growing body of evidence, the task force faced an enormous challenge. Tracking a man who was constantly moving, constantly adapting, constantly observing his surroundings with a predator's attention. At one point, authorities received a tip from a man who claimed he had met Francisco at a gas station outside Sao Paulo. He described the suspect as nervous, looking over his shoulder, asking unusual questions about road directions. The witness said he felt something was off, but only recognized the face when he later saw the photo on television. This tip provided investigators with something they desperately needed: timing. It suggested Francisco had passed through the area recently, possibly within hours. Immediately, police units were dispatched along the coastal highway. They analyzed nearby security cameras, cross-referenced license plates, and traced probable escape routes. For the first time, the team felt they were closing in. Meanwhile, back in Sao Paulo, families of victims waited for news with agonizing anticipation. Their stories were featured in documentaries, interviews, and public appeals. Their grief became a symbol of the urgent need for justice. Every press conference drew crowds of reporters who captured the raw emotions of these families. The frustration, the anguish, the rage, the exhaustion. They wanted answers. They wanted the manhunt to end. They wanted their lives back. The police, fully aware of the pressure, worked tirelessly. Some detectives spent nights sleeping in their offices, surrounded by case files. Others interviewed dozens of people a day. The stress was palpable, and the stakes were impossibly high. No one wanted another disappearance. No one wanted another family to suffer. Then came the breakthrough. A witness in Itapoa reported a man who fit Francisco's description living in a small boarding house near the harbor. The man paid in cash, kept his head down, and avoided conversation, behavior that locals found strange, given how small the community was. The witness noticed he stayed indoors during the day and left quickly at night, as if trying not to draw attention. When authorities saw the sketch the witness helped create, they knew it matched him. Immediately, a specialized unit traveled to the area. They arrived quietly without alerting the public. They didn't want him to run again. They didn't want another chase across the map. The operation had to be precise. While preparing for the approach, investigators reflected on how surreal the case had become. A man who once seemed ordinary, invisible even, had triggered one of the largest manhunts in the history of Brazil. His face was now recognized nationwide. His name evoked fear. His actions sparked debates across the country about urban safety, psychological profiling, and the vulnerabilities of young women seeking opportunities. And yet, despite all this, he remained elusive, a ghost in plain sight. But the ghost was running out of places to hide. When agents finally converged on the boarding house, they moved with deliberate caution. They secured the perimeter. They waited for the right moment. They observed the building from a distance, watching for any movement. The tension was suffocating, the kind of stillness that precedes a decisive moment in history. As evening descended, agents received confirmation that he was inside. Lights flickered through a small window. A silhouette moved briefly, then disappeared. That was enough. The order was given. The approach was swift. Officers advanced quietly, positioning themselves around exits. They knocked on the door, announcing themselves. There was no answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. The silence was unnerving. Finally, a lead officer called out his name. What happened next would become one of the most dramatic moments in the case. From inside, footsteps approached, slow, hesitant, almost resigned. A shadow passed behind the wooden door. Then the knob turned. The door creaked open, and there he was. Francisco de Assis Pereira stood in the doorway, thinner than in the photographs, with shaved hair, weary eyes, and the unmistakable expression of someone who knew he had run out of time. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply whispered, "I'm tired." For the task force, this moment wasn't a triumph. It was a haunting reminder of everything that had led to this point. The families who suffered, the fear that gripped the nation, the lives forever changed. The arrest marked the end of the manhunt. But the story, the horror, the revelations, the unanswered questions, was far from over. Because now came the part the country had been bracing for, understanding what he had done, understanding why he had done it, and facing the darkest chapter of the investigation. In the early hours of a gray São Paulo morning, one where the sun seems hesitant to rise, as if aware of what the city is slowly uncovering, Detective Anderson Barbosa steps out of the 40th Police Precinct and takes a long, deliberate breath. The air is humid, still carrying the faint echo of the previous night's rain. But what truly weighs on him is not the weather. It is the growing certainty shared by the entire investigative team. They are no longer searching for a missing person, nor for a suspect linked to a single tragic event. They are standing at the threshold of a brutal truth. A serial predator is hunting in the heart of the city, and each day that passes without capturing him means another life may slip into darkness. Barbosa enters the briefing room, where detectives, forensic experts, and analysts gather around a large table. On it lies a map of São Paulo, filled with red pins marking the locations where bodies, previously classified as accidents, disappearances, or isolated crimes, have been found over the last 5 years. For a moment, the room is silent. The pattern is now impossible to ignore. A cluster of pins sits around a single location, Ibirapuera Park. It is one of Sao Paulo's most beloved recreational spaces, a place where families gather, joggers run at dawn, couples walk at dusk. But beneath those trails, hidden behind thick bushes and silent dirt paths, something monstrous has been happening for years, undetected. Barbosa points to the map and begins speaking, his voice calm but heavy. We believe the same individual is responsible for all of these cases. He is targeting women, specifically young women, often alone, often approached near bus stops or in high-traffic commercial districts. He gains their trust, convinces them to follow him into the park, and that's where the attacks happen. The team listens in grim focus. Every detail matters now. Another detective, Carla Meneses, steps forward and opens a folder containing the composite sketches created so far based on witness accounts. She displays them one by one. A man described as friendly, well-spoken, gentle, even charming. The type of man who does not raise suspicion when he approaches a potential victim. The type of man people unconsciously trust. That's what scares me, Carla remarks. He doesn't stand out. He blends in. Barbosa nods. Exactly. He's hiding in plain sight. The investigation moves at an accelerated pace. Detectives interview merchants, bus drivers, security guards, and street vendors around Ibirapuera Park. Some recognize the man in the composite sketch. Others recall seeing a similar figure speaking to women, always with a polite smile, always with a calm demeanor. Then, finally, the first real lead emerges. A street vendor who sells drinks near the park remembers a man who often passed through the area. He recalls him because he always bought the same thing, a bottle of mineral water, and always lingered for a moment, scanning the surroundings as if evaluating the environment rather than enjoying the park. I saw him talking to a girl once, the vendor says. He was very polite. He even made her laugh. But something about him, I don't know, he didn't seem right. The detectives press for more details. Does the vendor remember his height, build, clothing, accent? Yes, the vendor says. He had a slight accent, northeastern, and he spoke softly, but very clearly. It's not much, but it's enough. While forensics teams revisit old cases linked to the park, the Homicide Division begins the arduous task of cross-checking the profiles of recently released offenders, men with prior assault convictions, and individuals previously accused of crimes against women. The list is initially enormous, but when filtered by age, region of origin, and behavioral patterns, it shrinks dramatically. And that's when a name surfaces: Francisco de Assis Pereira, a motorcycle courier, a man with a history of harassment complaints and accusations of assault, cases that never fully advanced in court. A man who had moved frequently, changed jobs often, and seemed to float anonymously through the city. He fits the description. He fits the pattern. But they still need proof. Detective Barbosa orders surveillance on Pereira's known addresses and workplaces. Officers monitor bus routes and inspect areas around Ibirapuera Park. But Francisco is elusive, vanishing into Sao Paulo's urban jungle with unsettling ease. Meanwhile, families of missing victims continue to come forward. Each new testimony adds to a chilling mosaic. Mothers recount the last conversations with their daughters. Sisters describe the clothes they were wearing. Friends mention the dreams they once shared. Detective Carla Meneses listens to every word, documenting each detail with quiet precision. But inside, she feels the weight of every story, the magnitude of the tragedy. One afternoon, as the team analyzes the case files, a young woman arrives at the precinct. She looks nervous, hesitant, yet determined. I think I know the man you're looking for, she says. Her name is Rosanna. She explains that a few weeks earlier, a man approached her near a bus stop, complimenting her and offering her modeling opportunities. He claimed he knew people in the fashion industry and could introduce her to the right photographers. The description matches Francisco perfectly. Rosanna recounts how she followed him to the edge of Ibirapuera Park, until something made her stop. A gut instinct, a sudden sense of danger. She apologized, turned around, and left. The man tried to convince her otherwise, but she didn't look back. As she tells her story, her voice trembles slightly. "I think he was going to hurt me," she says. The room falls silent. This testimony becomes the turning point. The detectives now have a behavioral match, a witness account, and a consistent pattern linking Francisco to multiple victims. The urgency intensifies. The task force grows. Every law enforcement unit across Sao Paulo is notified. Find Francisco de Assis Pereira alive, because he must answer for what he's done. Days of searching follow. Officers comb through abandoned buildings, check motorcycle courier hubs, visit addresses linked to Francisco's relatives. But he remains hidden. Journalists begin to catch wind of the investigation. Rumors spread. Television programs report the possibility of a serial offender in Sao Paulo. Anxiety surges throughout the city. Police decide to go public. During a press conference, Detective Barbosa steps forward, displaying the updated composite sketch. Cameras flash. Reporters bombard him with questions. Is Sao Paulo facing a serial killer? Is it safe for women to walk alone? How many victims are there? Barbosa answers carefully, avoiding speculation and focusing on verifiable facts. He stresses that authorities are working tirelessly and that public cooperation may be crucial for identifying the suspect's whereabouts. The broadcast changes everything. Within hours, new witnesses emerge. Some recognize the man in the sketch from shopping centers, street corners, or bus terminals. Others remember brief encounters, moments that seemed harmless at the time but now feel deeply unsettling. And then, just when the investigation reaches its peak, a call comes in. A woman in a coastal town several hours from Sao Paulo claims to have seen a man resembling the suspect. He's staying in a small rented room near the bus station. He keeps to himself. He avoids eye contact. He seems nervous. Detective Barbosa dispatches a team immediately. The journey to the coastal town is tense. Officers remain silent, mentally preparing for every possible outcome. When they arrive, they coordinate discreetly with local authorities and approach the building in question. As they climb the narrow staircase leading to the upper floors, the air grows thick with anticipation. Barbosa stops in front of the door. He signals to his team. 3, 2, 1. The door bursts open. Inside, a man sits on a bed, thin, unshaven, wearing worn-out clothes. He looks up in shock, eyes wide. For a moment, no one speaks. It is Francisco, the invisible predator, the man who haunted Sao Paulo, the figure behind years of unanswered questions and unspoken fears. He is taken into custody without resistance. The tension lifts, but only slightly, because the truth still needs to be uncovered. Barbosa watches him carefully as officers escort him out. The case is not over. Interrogations must begin. Confessions must be extracted. Details must be verified. And the families of victims must finally be given answers. As they drive away from the coastal town, Detective Carla Meneses glances out the window, watching the landscape pass in a blur. She knows that this arrest will bring closure to many, but it will never erase the pain endured by the victims and their families. The investigation is entering its final phase. And tomorrow, the world will finally hear the truth of what happened inside Sao Paulo's most famous park, and the mind of the man who turned it into a hunting ground. The finale is coming, and it will reveal the darkest instincts hidden behind the most ordinary face. The interrogation room is cold, intentionally so. A single fluorescent light hums quietly above the metal table, casting a pale glow across the walls. Detective Anderson Barbosa stands beside the one-way mirror, arms crossed, studying the man who has haunted Sao Paulo for years. The predator who blended into crowds, who hid behind politeness, who walked among ordinary people while carrying unthinkable intentions. Francisco de Assis Pereira sits calmly, almost unnervingly composed. His hands rest on the table, fingers interlaced, as if he were waiting for a routine appointment instead of facing accusations that have shaken an entire country. Detective Carla Meneses enters the room, carrying a folder thick with reports, witness statements, and forensic analyses. She sits opposite Francisco, opening the folder slowly, not to intimidate him, but to show the undeniable mountain of evidence that surrounds him. "Francisco," she begins, her voice measured, "we know why you're here. We know what's been happening in Iberpura Park. And we know you've been approaching women for years. You can deny it, you can stay silent, that's your right. But the truth will come out." Francisco looks at her for a long moment. Then he lowers his gaze. "I just wanted someone to listen to me," he says softly. Carla doesn't react. Not outwardly. Behind the glass, Barbosa exhales. Here it comes, the unraveling. For hours, the interrogation unfolds carefully, methodically, professionally. They ask about where he was on specific dates, about the women he met, about the modeling story he used repeatedly to approach them. Francisco answers selectively, alternating between evasiveness and brief, unsettling candor. At no point do detectives push for graphic recounts. They maintain professional boundaries, focusing on facts, timelines, and verifiable evidence. They never sensationalize details, keeping the investigation rooted firmly in lawful procedure and factual clarity. Still, one reality becomes increasingly clear. Francisco knew what he was doing. He sought vulnerability. He crafted a persona that disarmed suspicion. He understood how to manipulate trust. And now, finally, the facade is collapsing. By the end of the second day of questioning, investigators secure what they need: confirmations that match forensic findings, admissions that align with witness statements, and behavioral patterns that can be legally documented. With the evidence consolidated, authorities prepare the formal charges. The case is airtight, but the city outside is already trembling. News of Francisco's arrest spreads like wildfire. Television anchors deliver updates with somber urgency. Newspapers run front-page headlines that dominate kiosks and breakfast tables. Radio hosts field calls from listeners expressing fear, anger, relief, sometimes all three. For the families of victims, the emotions are even more complex. Some gather at the precinct, seeking answers, seeking closure, seeking the reassurance that the man who shattered their lives is finally behind bars. Detectives speak with them respectfully, carefully, making sure no detail outside legal boundaries is shared prematurely. Carla Meneses meets with one mother, a woman who clutches a framed photograph of her daughter, holding it like a lifeline. As she speaks, her voice trembles, but her resolve is powerful. "I just want to know," the mother says, "that he will never hurt anyone else again." Carla promises that the justice system is fully mobilized. Days later, the case proceeds to the next phase. Francisco is transferred to a secure facility where he awaits trial. Media presence is overwhelming. Cameras crowd the entrance. Reporters narrate every movement. Police cars escort the convoy through crowded streets as if transporting a figure whose crimes define a generation. But inside the convoy, Francisco remains composed, expressionless, silent, almost detached from the storm he created. For detectives, the case is technically progressing toward closure. But emotionally, the weight is only beginning to settle. Barbosa feels it most intensely. He spends long nights in his office reviewing the case files. Not because he needs to, but because each document represents a life interrupted, a family devastated, a story that deserved a different ending. One evening, as he closes yet another folder, he mutters to himself, "He hid in plain sight for so long. How many others like him walk among us unnoticed?" The question lingers, a reminder that evil often wears ordinary faces. Months later, the courtroom is packed. Journalists fill the benches. Families sit in silence. Every seat is occupied. The air is thick with expectation. Security officers line the walls, keeping the environment controlled. When Francisco is escorted into the room, the atmosphere shifts. He keeps his head down as he is led to the defendant's table. Cameras are prohibited. Only sketch artists capture the moment, but descriptions will soon circulate nationwide. The prosecution lays out its case meticulously. They present forensic evidence, expert testimonies, behavioral analyses, and the statements of survivors who narrowly escaped similar encounters. The narrative is powerful, grounded in facts, never drifting into theatrics. The defense attempts to argue mental instability, social isolation, and emotional distress. But the evidence is overwhelming, the patterns unmistakable. The judge listens carefully. After days of testimony, cross-examination, and final arguments, the courtroom falls silent as the verdict is read. Francisco is found guilty. There is no applause, no outburst, only quiet, heavy relief. For the first time in years, families feel a small measure of closure settling in their hearts. The city begins to breathe again. In the days following the verdict, São Paulo undergoes a transformation. Police increase patrols in public parks. Community groups organize safety workshops. Schools incorporate self-protection awareness programs. Women's organizations advocate for stronger legislation and better reporting mechanisms. Ibirapuera Park, once the predator's hunting ground, becomes a symbol of resilience. Authorities install new lighting, cameras, and emergency call points. Tourists return. Joggers resume their morning routines. But the memory of what happened there lingers softly in the minds of those who walk its trails. Detective Carla Meneses takes her first walk through the park months after the case closes. The leaves rustle above her. Families laugh in the distance. Life has returned to the park, but its history remains etched in the silence between footsteps. She pauses near the small clearing where officers once found a crucial piece of evidence. For a moment, she closes her eyes. "We stopped him," she whispers to herself. "We protected the next girl." The Maniac do Parque case becomes one of the most infamous in Brazilian criminal history, not because of sensationalism, but because it exposed vulnerabilities in urban safety, investigative procedures, and social awareness. Law enforcement agencies across the country update protocols based on lessons learned from the case. Investigators use the patterns established here to identify potential predators earlier. Universities study the psychological profile of the offender to understand how someone seemingly ordinary could commit such crimes. The case evolves from tragedy to teaching tool, from terror into a framework for protecting future generations. Detective Barbosa eventually speaks about the investigation at professional conferences. His tone is always sober, factual, respectful. He emphasizes vigilance, improved investigative techniques, and the necessity of listening to survivors. "Predators depend on silence," he says during one seminar. "Our job is to break that silence before another life is taken." Night falls over São Paulo. The city lights shimmer across the skyline, casting reflections on the surface of Ibirapuera Lake. A soft breeze moves through the trees. The park looks peaceful, almost serene. But this time, the serenity is earned. A lone police patrol car drives down the park's main path. The officers inside scan the surroundings with calm confidence. They know the importance of their presence. They know what was lost here and what was saved. As the camera rises above the park, the city stretches infinitely beyond it. Millions of people living, working, dreaming, unaware of how close danger once crept. A narrator's voice enters, low and steady. Some monsters hide in shadows. Others walk in daylight, unnoticed, until someone brave enough shines a light on them. Justice is not only about punishing the past, it's about protecting the future. Fade to black. The Maniac do Parque case reminds us that vigilance, awareness, and collective responsibility remain essential in every society. It shows how law enforcement, survivors, families, and communities can work together to stop predatory behavior before more lives are destroyed. If you want to see more cinematic, investigative deep dives like this, stories that expose hidden patterns, reveal historical truths, and analyze the darkest corners of real criminal cases, make sure to subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and share this video with someone who appreciates serious, well-researched storytelling. Because understanding these cases isn't about fear, it's about learning, awareness, and protecting each other.